Hi, I'm John Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of the NAFI More Right Rudder podcast, the podcast for flight instructors on the go. And today, I've got a special guest, Randall Williams. He is a pilot, DPE, and sailor. This guy has had adventures all over the world. I've followed him on social media and just always interested to see where he is and what he's doing. And one of the reasons why we decided to join up today was because we were talking about the correlation between the aviation world, the nautical world, and instructors for both. And I thought it'd be a really cool episode. And Randall's the perfect guy to talk to. So Randall, welcome.
Thanks. That's super fun. I have just returned from 6 months of living on my boat to check ride land. So I'm just back, and it's super fun that this worked out, and the schedule is and that our paths aligned. So
absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you live in Maine. So is your boat in Maine right now?
The boat is in Guatemala. So
not
so much warm in Maine during the winter. And so I've been for the past, let's call it 7-8 years, making laps around the Caribbean. And so multiple boats, had one boat, sold a boat, all that good stuff. But right now the boat is in deepest Guatemala, up the Rio Dulce, which is protected from hurricanes. And it's a freshwater river and big lake that's up there with a bunch of marinas in it. And that's kind of a spot where a lot of people end up for hurricane season. So now while the summer goes past and it's sweltering hot down there, I'm back in Maine. I'm giving check rides, doing the occasional instruction. You know, it's what's so interesting about it is as I keep digging into the DPE work, I realize that really examiners we're just instructors. It's like we're just people too, who got this extra gig from the FAA because we jumped through a bunch of hoops and we're decent at instructing. And so it's fun to when I can instruct a little bit, I like to do it still. So I still have some clients that I instruct for, but mostly it's just all check rides all the time. I'll do probably 150 rides this summer, and then I sail around in the winter.
That's incredible. So let's first start with your aviation background. Tell us a little bit about your accomplishments aviation wise and how that led to becoming an examiner.
Oh gosh. So I always thought I wanted to fly. And then my dear friend Michael died way too early. And he spent his last several years jumping out of planes before dying of cancer. And I realized that if I wanted to fly, now was the time. And so I got into it. And then I just started flying more. And I'm like, oh gosh, I guess I have to get a commercial rating now. And oh gosh, I guess I'm going to have to be an instructor. And and then I ended up buying an airplane and ended up running a flight club for a while and had 3 airplanes and then sold all that. And it was right about the time that I was like, well, maybe I just want to go sail across the Pacific, that I was like, well, maybe I also want to fly jets. So I put a couple applications in and I literally had gotten no bites back. And I'm like, that's okay. Nobody loves me. I'm just going to go fly. And then it was literally that day after I had made the decision not to go be a commercial pilot and burn Jet A that I got a call. And so flew a private jet for a while and then went off to a 121 carrier, flew the 7576 and decided that schedule really didn't fit my lifestyle either. And so I left the 121, 135 world and I am back to burning avgas and piston singles and twins. So I'm enjoying the examining and enjoying the schedule and the time off and the community. It's really more community support, because the community all over the country, we need examiners. We need to keep that pipeline flowing. And I'm excited to be part of that chain and part of the community and, back in Maine and here to enjoy it rather than, zipping off across time zones.
Yeah. I find it interesting though, your statements of, oh, do I want to become a commercial pilot or do I just want to, I don't know, maybe sail across the ocean? Like, as if that's just a normal day-to-day decision that people make.
Yeah. Well, those of us without families, if you can keep your expenses low, you can kind of do whatever you want, right? I mean, if a cell phone bill is your biggest expense and, the occasional like hospital visit, it's like, well, let's go have an adventure. So that's kind of what I've been doing for, probably 8 or 10 years now. and just living cheaply. But I'm super curious to hear what happens for you in your new gig with relation to your family. Like, will you be away too much? Will it work? Like, because that's a rough balance.
It can be. It can be. Yeah. He's referring to I'm supposed to go to Gulfstream training soon, and I'm excited about it. Anytime you get a type rating, it's not particularly an exciting month. It's 3 weeks of just intense fire hose and not seeing the sun. But it's always a great feeling when it's done, and I do think that the adventures are going to be good. We fly all across the world, and primarily a couple destinations in Europe, a couple destinations in Asia, and also South America. So it's kind of exciting for me.
John, so I think if I'm counting right, this is like your fourth type rating or so.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
wonder if as a
Good
flight
guess.
instructor, did you build some hard skills to help you like drink from the fire hose?
It's you learn how to learn is really kind of what I figured out. It's
Mm-hmm.
less about being, smart. It's less about being, able to keep up per se, but it's more about figuring out how to retain that message because if you can help someone else retain it, you can sort of figure out how to do it yourself. And so, I figured out that for me, it's blunt force trauma. It's I need to sit there and I need to stare at it and I need to write it down. And I mean, I literally have a worksheet where one of my coworkers did all the limitations for the airplane, and he did like a little like cheat sheet. I blanked it out and I printed about 50 copies of it. And like every day, I just do like two of them. And eventually, over the course of a month, I might remember 75%. Who knows?
Yeah, my friend
So
Adam just got out of G4 training. He's like, the systems. Yeah, so
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it's exciting for me, and it's we'll see what happens, but it'll be good when it's over.
Yeah.
um, you know, it,
Yeah.
the instructor thing also the thing that comes from it in this particular capacity is you sort of learn to trust the process because having been an instructor and having asked my own students to sort of trust me, this picture is going to come
Mm,
together. You will
mm,
get there. I'm not going to
mm,
let you fail unless,
mm-hmm,
something happens that I can't
mm-hmm,
control, but I'll get
mm-hmm,
you there. And
mm-hmm.
when you're staring down the barrel of this giant elephant of an airplane and going, I'm halfway through and I don't understand it. And they just sit there and go, in another week and a half, you will.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I had a student come to me one time because he was applying for a job that required that he have a CFI double I MEI, and he was already a CFI, but he needed to add on an instrument instructor and a multi-engine instructor within a week. And he flew across the country, and we had 3 solid days in the middle of that week of bad weather here in Maine,
Mm.
and it was such hard work, and I was totally focused on working with him. And at the end of that week, it was Friday morning. We were on our way to the check ride. Somebody had taken a single engine plane down to the airport where we were going. We were getting in the Aztec, and the fuel pump went. And he looks at me and he's like, "What are the odds that this check ride's going to happen today?" And I'm like, "It is totally going to happen today." I had a great relationship with the maintenance guy, and literally, I got the IA on the phone. I walked into the building. The previous owner of the plane had the pump right there, like the IA came over and installed it, and we were half an hour late for the check ride and practiced on
Wow.
our way down. Yeah, and that was and the same thing. Like in type rating, the same deal. The middle of that training on the Challenger, I was like, how am I going to get this? And sure enough, on check ride day, like it was all right there. So yeah, that is definitely a muscle that we learn.
Yeah, yeah. So it definitely helps. I still say, and anybody who's listened to this podcast has heard me say this probably a dozen times now. But when I did go to the airlines, they made us all raise our hand and say, "Hey, how many of you have been instructors before?" And they came out and actually said, based on the airline statistics, that the people that run through the process who have been instructors, especially were recently using their instructor certificate actually tended to do better. And
Wow.
I always thought that was incredible.
Yeah. I love instructing. And one of the things I realized early on is that what I loved most about it was being a mentor and support for those people who came to me. And so I was clear almost throughout the entire time that I was actively teaching that I was going to be their biggest aviation support. And probably a few dozen of them still reach out occasionally and some even more frequently. And
Yeah.
I just I love that piece of I'm here to support you. And so the examiner stuff has been the same way. Like I'm an instructor who's volunteered to the FAA to help the FAA with this process of certificating pilots and making sure that like the end of the chain is all clean, that when an instructor signs somebody off, they're really ready to go.
Hmm.
And so it's like we're just sort of helping pilots, mentoring pilots, and it's fun because it takes the anonymity away from, I'm the FAA and I'm here to get to find the holes and fail you. Like, no, I'm here to make sure you come home safely after every flight. And if I feel like there's a chance you're not going to do that, you don't want to get in that plane either. But I'm on your team. So it feels like an extension of the instructor role, even though the hardest part of the job is that you can't instruct. So like
Yeah.
you're sitting there asking questions that you know the answer to, and you're watching them do stuff, and you're just sitting on your hands going, yep, 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 cool. And then occasionally, like you have these beautiful moments of watching them shine. I remember there was one applicant who came to me for a commercial ride. It was the first commercial ride I'd done in a Cessna 180, and I've got a bunch of 180 time. But on his power off 180, he killed the power and he just floated forever. And I'm like, God, he is never going to make that landing spot. And I'm just sitting on my hands, and he brought it in so tight. And at the last minute, like 50 feet, he just slipped a tiny little bit, brought it back, and he set it exactly on the spot we had named. And I just started laughing. I mean, it's just so fun. So yeah, the instructor stuff never goes away.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite things that I did, and I didn't get to do it for all that long. I think I did it for maybe a year and a half to 2 years, but I was a check instructor, a training instructor on the Learjet in my previous position. So I got to train all of our new hires and I got to do
Awesome.
our upgrade candidates. And boy, was that fun.
It was a
I
45, right?
It was a 45 and a 75.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, you fall into that role quickly again. My favorite thing when I was doing primary instruction was helping with students that, took a little bit longer. I don't want to say they struggled always, but, sometimes that too. And I felt like I always related to that because I struggled. I wasn't the one that picked it up on the first go. I had friends that were that people, but I was never that person. So for
Yeah.
me, I tended to lag a little bit behind, and you catch up eventually. But I find that pilots who struggled tend to be the best instructors because they understand what it's like to struggle. And so taking that into the Lear world, I mean, I was training a lot of pilots that this was their first jet. They passed their type rating,
Yeah.
but this was their first
Yeah.
jet. No
Yeah.
auto throttles. Yeah, we had an
Yep.
autopilot, but you had to
Yep.
manually do the rest of that stuff.
Yep.
And um I remember there was one day where I had one pilot who was really struggling, and I knew just from general, I mean, all of the stuff that you teach in private and commercial translates into a jet. And when somebody has struggle, scan. When you know that their scan is messed up,
Yeah.
you do the exact same things.
Yeah.
So, I looked
Yeah.
at him and I said, all right, here's the deal. Everything's legal. So I'm going to preface that by saying I didn't do anything I shouldn't have,
Yeah.
but we're going to hand fly and we're going to turn the flight director off. And you're going to fly a jet like you flew a 172, and you're going to use your eyes. Because the only way I'm going to get you to use your eyes and to scan properly is if I take away the thing that's keeping you from doing it.
Oh, I love it.
And I called it Scan Boot Camp.
Yeah.
And I came back, and our director of training, he walked up and he's like, "Hey, how'd he do?" And I was like, "Oh, I knew he was struggling with this. We did that, and I forced him to fly raw data." And he's like, "You did what?" And at first I thought I was in trouble. And he's like, "I don't even know if I could do that." He's like, "You're really mean."
Yeah, in a swept wing Lear 45. Yay.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the pilot
Yeah,
came
yeah.
back with a big old smile on his face. He's like, "That was the best
Mm-hmm.
flight I've ever had."
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, because you realize you can fly the jet.
Yep.
We had in this, the 7.6 sim, we had one instructor who would take us all the way back to basics like that. He's all right, show me 60-degree seat turns. Like, go ahead. Like, whoa, hey, look at this. Now you've got the energy to do all this stuff. He'd flame us out 5 miles from the airport at 300 knots, be like, put it on the runway. And we put it on the runway. Like, so it was, yeah,
Can't say I do
yeah,
that, but
yeah. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't, right? You don't. But he was pushing the envelope to show us, like, this is an airplane. Just fly it.
yeah.
So, yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
So
So you wanted to ask about sailboats, and I gotta say, I'm lit up around what pilots can teach sailboaters, because the correlations are so deep and so good, and because we need to be so safety conscious and so aware, because we're working in three axes, and because gravity, there's so much more that you have to do, but it all applies. And I was just literally thinking the other day about briefing an approach, because I'm going into this river bar in Livingston, and I have, in Guatemala, and it's this deep, and here's my tidal range, here's where the current's coming from, and here's what the wind's doing, and here's the speed we're going to do it at. And so literally I was briefing it the same way that I would brief an instrument approach, and talking it through out loud, and talking through the depth. Like, okay, now there's a foot under the keel. Okay, now there's 6 inches under the keel. Okay, well, here's a foot again. Like, okay, now we've passed the bar. Like, and I'm literally just calling it out to myself while I'm sailing in. So, yeah, no, I think there are a ton of correlations.
So how does it work? When you start to learn to sail, what's that process look like? How long does it take? Is it the same kind of thing where you have a like training instructor and monitor hours, or
So here's the thing I think you might not know about me, is that I taught myself to sail by buying a 20-foot boat for $800 in Sweden and taking off for North Africa. I
as
wrote a
one
book
does,
about
of
it.
course?
It was as you, yeah, who doesn't do that? Yeah, I know, it was incredibly naive. It was such a bad deal. But I was like, this is what I'm going to do, and so I sort of, the aerodynamics of it, I sort of had to teach myself. But I went to a couple of sailing classes, and I did a radio communication class. So I ended with a Swedish recreational sailboat license, but I really had no idea how to sail upwind, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I read all these books about people in little 20-foot boats, and I just took off. And so I learned, and this is before I had learned to fly. And so I learned all these things, like, okay, well, here's the wind, and here's how we can use the sails, and I sort of started to figure it out. But it was really risky. Like, at one point, I made it out of the Baltic, and I got into the North Sea, and at one point I had realized, well, okay, the tide's doing this and the wind's doing this, so that means I have to leave at 2 a.m. in order to get over there. So I had dead reckoning and all that stuff before I came to do it as a pilot and later an instructor. So that dead reckoning stuff was like, oh yeah, cool, I know this, and calculating, calculating time and distance and drift and all that good stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of correlations.
So you mentioned that you don't think there's a lot that translates from sailing into aviation. Why do you say that?
Well, in aviation, you've got to be so precise because the speeds are so much faster. I mean, you're moving at Mach, you're moving at 0.82, 0.95, or you will be soon. And a sailboat's moving 6 knots. And the sailboat is in one plane. If your mast falls off and you no longer have lift, then it's kind of like, you're having a bad day. I hope you didn't get hit by the mast. But if your wing falls off, you're done, right? So the level of challenge and the number of things you have to be on top of as a pilot is so much bigger than in a sailboat. But in a sailboat, there's still a whole lot of things you have to be on top of relative to, a kayaker or somebody who's driving a car, and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So you can buy a boat and take off in it and figure stuff out and probably not hurt yourself as long as you're cautious. You cannot do the same in an airplane.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Better to get instruction. If you're a pilot, you're already going to understand a whole bunch of stuff. So, and I recommend it. Sailing is super fun, so.
So what about the other way? What do pilots bring to that equation when they start to go down the road of becoming sailors or even sailing instructors eventually? What does that look like?
I think it's pre-flight, it's mechanical knowledge, it's aerodynamic knowledge of stalls and how an airfoil works and Bernoulli and all that good stuff. And we already understand about set and drift, for current and wind and how we can center of effort and how we can make a boat move forward. That's where a pilot on a sailboat will be like, well, it works like an airplane works, right? Like this is an airplane wing, because you have these two sails that are effectively working like wings together, which is how the Arabs figured out going upwind, right? The Romans are like, well, throw up a bed sheet and see if the wind will push us someplace. And the Arabs are like, well, I don't know. If we can turn this thing into a triangle, we can go upwind. And so the Arabs are like, cool, let's go up the Nile and trade with everybody. And so that's what they did. And the Romans are like, oh, that's cool. Let's do that. So that's how the Arabs beat everybody to it, and sailing up the Nile and the old dhow rigs and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Huh. So for you, do you find yourself having to change your mindset when you jump between the two, kind of like you do when you have to go from one airplane to another, and you're like, oh, how does this one work again? Does that happen when you jump from an airplane to a boat, or do you sort of naturally find yourself settling into that role without having to think about it?
I think it probably settles in okay. What was really fun is while I was on my trip. So this winter I sailed from Miami to the Bahamas down to Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, and then Honduras and Guatemala. So that was a big beautiful trip. But in the middle, I was in the Cayman Islands and I reached out to see if I could go for a flight. And the guy was so excited that a U.S. flight instructor was on the island. He basically handed me the keys to his N-registered airplane and all of his students. He's like, here, go fly with my people. So he had all these U.S. students, and he's like, go fly with them. And I'm like, okay, here we go. So I did get to jump back into a 172 in the middle of sailing, and it was so fun to be back low and slow because I hadn't been doing a lot of GA before that because I'd been flying heavies, but it was so sweet just to get back in a little four-seater and teach the basics. And yeah, no, I loved it.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
yeah.
So, unrelated, when you have your boat left in Guatemala for a summertime, do I want to know the level of giant spiders and snakes that are probably on your airplane right now? Like,
Yeah,
how
it's
frightening
it's
is that?
it's in a marina and somebody's watching it and they're opening it every day. So it's fine, and I'll go back and God willing, it'll be mold free, and so there'll be a little bit of cleaning and some projects to do, but then I'll start going again. So yeah,
But
I'm
seriously,
starting
the
to
spiders are
yeah.
huge, right?
They're gigantic, yeah, and there's snakes and all sorts of good stuff down there, and there's iguanas. And yeah, delicious. Yeah. So so you're working Part 91. So do you get to get out and enjoy some of the places you go, or is it really just rest and then go back?
It sort of depends. I was very lucky on my first ocean crossing. It was about as nice as it could be. We
Where'd you go?
uh, we went we went from Benton Harbor, Michigan to Milan, Italy,
Okay. So
and
were
with a
you on the
stop in Maine.
tracks?
Actually, we
You were
did
on the
stop.
tracks.
No, we
Okay.
we were above them,
Okay.
and
Of course. Of course. Yeah. Of course.
yeah,
Sorry. No,
and
no. No, no. We were above them.
right, looking down on all the rest of the people. Um,
This was the
no,
Falcon.
what's that?
This was the Falcon.
Yeah.
Oh God, that's so great. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so we were there for we landed in the morning because most of our passengers like to time it so that they can sleep on the airplane, get off, go straight into meetings,
Yeah, sure.
and
Sure.
so we got there sort of 8 a.m. Italy time, and we were there for I think 3 full days, and then came back. So it's like
That's cool.
the only thing that stinks is your family's not there, but it was
Right.
basically a full vacation of walking around the
Yeah.
city and seeing things.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's super
So
great. Was instructing for you a means to an end to get hours to be able to fly jets?
it started out that way.
Uh-huh.
I can't I think I've I hope I haven't ever said anything otherwise. Otherwise, I'm contradicting myself. But it started out that way. I think that I knew that it was something that I was going to do, and the process of training for your CFI is enough for anyone to question how much do I like this, because it's intense. I mean, it's still after type ratings and jets and everything else, my CFI ride is still the hardest check ride I've ever had.
Wow.
Um, and
Wow.
and so it's intense. So you start to wonder, like, am I cut out for this? Do I want to do this?
Mm,
And again, going back to my previous statement, um, I found out how much I really liked it.
mm.
And I full disclosure, I actually found that out before I came to NAFI. Um,
Oh, that's fun.
so it wasn't, NAFI wasn't one of those things where it was like, oh, this is a job, I'll do it because it's, something to do for a while. It is a job because it truly is something that I've been passionate about ever since I started doing the job.
Mm,
It's very easy to look at instructing as a, like you said, a sort of means to an end, but it's also extremely easy to fall in love with it while you do it.
hmm.
And like I said, I was a little bit of a hard case myself when I was going through training, and I had really good instructors who kind of put me over their shoulders and carried me across the finish line, and it was really rewarding for me to be able to have the same effect on people. I have one student and I am tickled pink because he went through a couple instructors and struggled a little bit, and I got paired up with him and worked with him for a little while, and all of a sudden he's through his private, through his instruments. I helped him a little bit with his commercial, and now he's a NetJets pilot. And you
Ah,
know,
it's so fun.
yeah,
That's
just
so
just to
fun.
be able to see this
Yeah.
kid succeed and
Yeah.
be every bit as good as I knew he was.
Mm,
Um, now he sees exactly what I saw, and there's nothing
mm.
like that.
That's really
So
rewarding.
it's
Hey,
great.
I've been thinking about, and you and I've talked about this for a while. I've been thinking about putting in the paperwork to be a master CFI for a while.
Yeah.
Um, Help me understand, just like it's sort of rhetorical, but sort of not. Like, what is that? Why do that? Why would somebody want to do that? To be a NAFI master CFI?
You know, it's it's a wonderful program. It's something that, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the program's been going on since the 90s. Greg Brown was the very first master CFI ever accredited. And since then, there's been less than 1,000 master CFIs. It's now 2023. So, you do the math. There's it's a very small group of individuals. And, you know, it requires a lot of work, not just to apply for the program, but the amount of activity that has to be done in a 24 calendar month window is incredible. And I preface anything that I say about the master CFI, and it's not to necessarily say, oh, hey, this person is better than a person who isn't a master CFI. What it does tell me about this person is that they are so incredibly dedicated to the craft that they operate in and the profession that they are in, that they put forth this level of activity, not just towards instructing in general, but you also see that they've bettered themselves, they've bettered their community. And it's a great way to recognize somebody for that effort. So that's kind of a roundabout way of saying, why does somebody want to do it? Well, it really proves that you are in sort of a small community of instructors that go that level above and beyond what
Mm,
a I don't average isn't the right word because that generalizes people, but the standard CFI.
hmm.
And what do they get out of it? Well, they really kind of get that recognition. And if I were one of our board members, Aaron Dabney, who is not just a board member, but he started out as a master instructor, then became a one of our review panel because we have independent reviewers for the program, and now he's a board member. And what he says is, yes, the accreditation is sort of an award for the instructor, but he says it's actually for him, it's a challenge for him to be better and a challenge for him to make other instructors better. So really, there's all these things that you get, and we try not to give prizes for the master instructor because that's not what it's about. But it allows the community, it allows the students to understand how active and how searching for words here, and how just serious you are at giving your all to the profession, and that shows. And it draws people in, it draws business in, it's nationally recognized, the FAA recognizes it.
Yeah.
They have to make sure that when we designed the program, everything had to be approved through them, which is great because it's a feather in our cap. It's also kind of one of those
Yeah.
things where it's like I can't change it without their approval now, so
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
becomes
Yeah.
a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But it's just it's a wonderful program in the sense that we as NAFI get to see the amazing work that these people do. And I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
It does, and I feel inspired by it. Like
yeah,
it feels like it turns up the heat on the simmering burner,
it
because
really
I've been
does.
thinking about it
It's
for a while.
As
Yeah.
pilots, we like challenges, and
Yeah.
the master CFI is a challenge on both sides. It's a challenge to get, but then it's also a challenge to make you go, okay, I've gotten this. People are looking up to me even more than they already did. How do I now exceed expectations? And I think that you see within our master CFI community that they all consistently do that. And it's great. You see guys like Aaron Dabney. You see Sarah Rovner. She's a former master CFI. That's a mutual
Yeah.
friend of ours.
Yeah.
Um, Jason Blair is a numerous time master. I mean, these individuals, they're out there, they're doing it, they're making a difference, and
Yeah.
people know their name.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
NAFI doesn't take credit for any of that. So please don't take this statement the wrong way. But we're privileged to have been a part of helping them get to the points that they've reached. It's a
Mm-hmm.
very small part, but we got to see them in their sort of blooming status, and that's
Yeah.
a really cool thing
Well,
for us.
you held up the bar, right? You're like, well, here, here's this bar, and they're like, I got it, I got it. So
Yeah,
we did a podcast with Sarah before,
we did.
and you put out, gosh, it was recently on the NAFI Facebook group that you said, hey, who's got some stories they'd like to share, and I wrote you a couple of blog entry stories that are coming out. And you and I got into a sort of a conversation about how we survived training incidents and like
Mm-hmm.
what happened. So, do you have training incident stories to share?
A few.
Surviving.
You get some of the standard ones of people trying to stall spin and do these other ones. I will actually, without ratting any of my students out, I'll change the question a little bit and sort of put it into an issue that I had myself. And this is one of those things that I learned where it's just because you can doesn't mean you should. I was going down to Sun and Fun, and a friend of mine had said, "Hey, I need help transporting an airplane, and we need to deliver this airplane here. I need you to bring a second airplane to go with me so that you can then pick me back up and bring me back to Sun and Fun." So great, I can do that. I'm a pilot. It'll be great. And he says, "Okay, I'm going to need you to transport a 182." Well, I've never flown a 182, but it's probably close enough to 172. Everything's fine, right? Yeah. Yeah, okay. And so I get up there, and this is where sort of the Swiss cheese starts lining up. I'm like, where's the checklist? There's no checklist for 182. You don't need that. Oh, you sure? Because everything I've seen says that you're supposed to have a checklist. Nah, you'll be fine.
Oh gosh.
Okay. Well, I'm unfamiliar with the area.
Unfamiliar with
The
the airplane. Yeah.
Unfamiliar with the airplane. The
Yeah.
GPS isn't working. Oh, but you've got a sectional. That's cool. And so yeah, so I decide for whatever reason that this all of this is a good idea. and we get up and it takes off mostly like a 172. That was fine. And we get to where we need to go, and I come down for landing, and I try to land it like a 172. And having as much 182 time as you have, I'm sure you're very familiar with what I went through.
I feel what's about to happen.
Yep,
Yeah.
Plant City, Florida.
Yeah.
During Sun and Fun, while there's everybody and their mother standing there,
Yeah.
having their hoagies and their cokes,
Did you
and
break
just
anything?
you're flying, watching this 182 come in, bam, bounce once, bounce twice. Now,
Oh
I was
no.
an instructor,
Oh
and
no. Oh
I
no.
told all
Oh
my
no.
students, I said,
Oh
hey,
no.
if you
If you
bounce,
bounce it, go around.
get out of there. What did I do?
And
I
you
was
broke
like, no,
your.
I'm
Oh
better than
no.
this.
Oh John.
I'm super
Oh
pilot
no.
John. So,
Oh God.
I add a little bit of power, I stabilize it, I get it down finally, and I think I got the thing stopped in like it felt like the last 100 feet of that runway. I
Oh
think everybody
God.
was standing there on the ramp going, well, this
Oh
guy's going to
God.
crash. And
Oh
I
God.
get, yeah, well, and I get there and I went, this was just the absolute dumbest thing I've ever done.
Oh
Just,
gosh.
oh my goodness. And I'm white and reasonably shaking,
Mhm.
and the pilot I was with in the other airplane is like, okay, cool. Well, now I'm going to need you to move this airplane to this airport. And I'm like, I just nearly killed myself, and you want me to get back in this thing? What?
And broke the airplane. Yeah. Yeah.
Did not break the airplane, thankfully. Everything
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
cool.
Good.
It all worked out. And he's like, oh, yeah, when you're on a 182, when you go to land, you just got to put a bunch of nose up trim and you'll be fine. And I went, why didn't you tell me this before we? So the lesson there, as a student who should have had an instructor for this airplane, um, just because it looks like the airplane that you've been flying doesn't necessarily mean that it does all the things that the airplane you've been flying actually does.
Yeah.
And when the hairs start to stick up on the back of your neck, and
Yeah.
you go, boy, this is bad. That's
Yeah.
bad too. You need to listen to that little voice in your head telling you,
Oh.
don't take off, dummy.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I had a you one of the stories that I wrote for you was me telling on myself for a similar kind of issue where I'm like, this was in a twin engine plane when I finally had my first real power failure, and I had done 200 simulated drills. Like I had a little multi-intensive training thing going on where people were coming from all over the country to do this multi-engine training, and I'd done dozens and dozens of applicants, and and I was training them, and so we shut engines off and turned engines back on, and we simulated shutting engines down, and we'd done it hundreds of times. And on the day it finally happened, I'm with a client, and we're outside the final fix, and it's VMC. We're training. He's under the. I don't even know if he was under the hood. I don't think he was even under the hood. We're shooting this approach, and we're coming in. All of a sudden, I can hear the grinding and the pounding of the right engine coming apart. And gosh darn it, if I didn't reach down and grab that right mixture and just pull it all the way back. And there was no identify, verify, there was no fix, there was no feather, there was just boom. And the second that lever came to the stop, I went, and then I went, oh, I got the right engine. Well, that's good. I should probably feather it. Like literally, it was that sort of surreal. Like, as an instructor, like don't just randomly jump into a plane and go take off and go fly this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I took off on a flight by myself in a 206 one time, and literally the chief pilot came over and he's like, you ever flown a 206 by yourself? And it was that same kind of deal. But I knew what was going on, and I'd had some dual time in a 206, so I knew, like, don't just chop the power and land it like a 172. Like, that nose is heavy. Like, don't porpoise it. But yeah, no, sure enough, on the day when it actually happened, I did the wrong thing, you know?
Well, and to take that question and flip it on its head, in other situations where there are emergencies going on, I feel like the communication skills and frankly the crew resource management skills that we learn as instructors put us a step above everything else. I'll give you an example. This is sort of a shiny gold star on my pocket here. I've had to shut an engine down in a jet once.
Okay.
and only once. And I hope it doesn't happen again, but it sort of proves that the training goes, the way it's supposed to. We were taking a Lear to I think it was Brownsville, Texas, and owner was on board, and we were coming down through the 30s, I think, and we were sort of around San Antonio or so. And for those that don't know, Brownsville's in southern Texas.
Way
And
down there.
yeah, long runway and controlled fire rescue, the whole deal. And we were getting an issue with I want to say the oil pressure indicator, and it's spiking up and down, back and forth. And of course, myself and my first officer were there, and I were communicating. And sometimes in those situations, when you're a little bit scared, just talking helps. And so that I learned that as an instructor too. It's like, I'm a little bit frightened right now, but I'm just going to talk to the student, and that makes me forget about how scared I am. And so him and I are talking about the situation at hand, and I say, okay, well, let's try this. Let's see if it stabilizes. Nope. Okay. Now it's starting to get a little worse, and we run the checklist, and the checklist basically gives you sort of 3 doors to potentially open. And it says, okay, if the oil pressure is high, do this. If the oil pressure is low, do this. And there was another circumstance to do that. And what we found was, and I'm a little fuzzy on some of the details now, but we didn't clearly fit in any of the 3 doors.
Because it was fluctuating.
Because it was fluctuating, and I think it had something to do with the oil temp as well. It was like, if it's low and high, do this. If it's high and low, do that. And we were kind of reciprocal of one of them, but we knew that it didn't fit, but we were trying to figure out which one does it fit the most with. And we called up ATC, we declared an emergency. We said, hey, this is what we're doing. And they said, well, do you want to land in San Antonio or divert or something like that? And we said, well, I've got probably another 15 minutes of checklist that I got to do before I land anyways. I'm about 25 minutes from our destination, long runway, medical services, fire. I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah. Cool.
There's that corporate pilot that's like, I'm going to make sure the passengers get where they need to go, because that matters. It doesn't, for those wondering.
Nope, not in the slightest.
And so, I'm talking with my first officer, and I remember distinctly, because we didn't fit. And I said, I'm thinking that we need to follow down the path of shutting this engine down. And he goes, okay. And he was still a fairly new first officer. And I said, here's what I need you to do, though. Before we do this, I need you to give me a compelling reason why we shouldn't. Because I don't want to shut it down, but I think we need to. Tell me why I shouldn't do that.
Boy, that's really interesting. Because you need to take a minute to slow down anyway, rather than just running off through the checklists.
Exactly.
Sure.
So it's like, give me validation. Give me a reason why I shouldn't do this, because I'm pretty sure that we need to, but I really don't want to.
Yeah.
And we talked about it a little more, and realistically, he couldn't give me a reason not to. So I said, okay. Click, engines off. Awesome. Now, in this moment, I learned another lesson. And this is one of those things that I have brought back into instructing as well. So when we go into the sim and we run single engine work, as you are aware, on a type write, it's all instrument. None of it's VFR.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been trained to shoot a visual approach single engine in a jet? No.
Nope.
Now, granted, visual approach, a pilot may be saying to themselves, it's just a visual approach. You should be able to do a visual approach.
No,
yes,
but it's
the answer
different.
to that is yes.
It's different. Yeah.
It's different. So we were coming into Brownsville. We had the airplane configured. The engine was shut down. Everything was happy-go-lucky. And I told my first officer, I said, besides the checklist, I don't care about anything else, but watch that rudder. Make sure that rudder is centered at all moments, because I'm going to get distracted. And if I get distracted, the first thing that's going to go is the rudder.
That was really smart of you. That was really smart.
Well, and the ATC lady, here's the part that wasn't smart. She goes, do you want the ILS or do you want the visual? In my head, I picked the visual because, well, it's going to get me on the ground faster
Yeah, you want the ILS
all day long
all day
because
long. Yeah, yeah,
what I wasn't prepared for was I'd never done that before. I can shoot an ILS single engine with my eyes closed.
yeah,
A visual is going to cause me to do things out of
yep,
order,
yep,
different than what I'm used to.
yep,
And there is a difference there. And
yeah,
I
yeah,
was glad that I asked him to do that because I'm shooting this visual. I'm a little bit tighter into the airport than I normally would be. I'm worried about getting the airplane on the ground, and that rudder started to go. And he did exactly what I asked him to do. He goes, "Your rudder's starting to fluctuate." I went, "Look down." "Oh, okay, thanks." And we got it on the ground.
And in a single engine swept wing Lear at low altitude, you don't have any room for that rudder to go. Yeah, good for
Exactly.
you. Good for
So,
you. Yeah, that's
and
cool.
the best compliment I've ever gotten in my flying career. We had three passengers on board, and we had notified them. We said, "Hey, this is what's going on. I'm not worried. You shouldn't be worried." And oh, by the way, when we land, if you see a bunch of flashing lights and some cool fire trucks, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. Just I need you not to, don't panic. And so we got on the ground, and fire rescue did exactly what they were supposed to do. They asked us if we were okay. We said yes. They said, "Well, we're going to follow you to the FBO anyways." So we got this cool fire truck escort all the way to the FBO and shook their hand, and away
And
we went.
ultimately, was it something more than a sensor? Was it truly an issue?
So here's the thing. We had maintenance come out. And the first day after we landed and got the passengers on their way, maintenance looked at it and they said, "Well, if it were something, we would see some sort of fluids coming out. We'd see pooling. We'd see this, that, and the next thing." They didn't see that. They said, "But we don't have time today to take a look at it. We'll take a look at it tomorrow." Well, when they came back the next day, there was oil all below the engine.
Awesome.
Yeah, because here I was stressing
Awesome.
out about the fact that I'm like, okay, if we don't fit into this checklist, if I go off the rails, I'm
And
not
shut it down
following it.
for an indication. Yeah, sure.
I might not be doing the proper procedure anymore
Won't have a
because,
job.
well,
Yeah.
why'd you shut the engine down? Well, the checklist told me to do it. Did it?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and as it turned out, there was a bearing that broke, and it was squirting engine into the combustion chamber, or squirting oil into the combustion chamber. And they estimated that we had less than a minute left of operation before that engine started to grind itself apart. So not only did we have a successful outcome, but we had a engine that was savable as well. And
That's
so,
fantastic. Yeah, good
yeah,
job.
but
Good job.
those are the kinds of things where from what kind of experience do you draw from as an instructor? Well, it's rationalizing some of these things that, like, how do I deal with this? How
Yeah.
do I utilize another person in the cockpit? Because you can utilize your students for those same types of events. If you've got an engine failure
Yeah.
in a 172, you better be talking to your student.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, figuring out how to do that, and something as simple as, even as we mentioned before, compartmentalizing that fear. It's big. I mean, you can do you figure that out during training, but if I think instructors have a better capacity to understand what that feels
Mhm.
like than somebody
Mhm.
who didn't go
Mhm.
through that path.
I had an instructor I was just talking to yesterday. It's like, hey, I just got an interview at an airline. I really need to know more about CRM and multi-pilot crews. And I was like, oh, right. That's a skill that I have now because I've been doing that. Like, I love how the good pilot's always learning, right? I love how we keep building these skills so that we do more and more and more. And yeah, that learning curve is cool. I like that about us.
Yeah, I mean, so what was the drive for you? I mean, you got your certificate, you talked about wanting to kind of do more and more and more, and eventually that led you to CFI. Did you see that as an option when you first started flying?
No, no. I was step by step the whole way, and it was only sort of as I'd get one rating that I'm like, well, looks like I'm going to have to get the next. And by the time I'd gotten my CFI, I'm like, well, I'm going to end up with my ATP at some point, but I'm definitely never wearing a pilot uniform. Like, did not imagine myself in a 121 dark blue suit. Like, it never crossed my mind. And then gosh, it wasn't until like I was flying corporate. Now I'm in the uniform that, like, well, I guess I need to buy the pilot luggage. And, so here I am loaded up with luggage work. And I'm like, this is actually kind of sweet. When I got the job interview call to fly the 7.6, I was like, I guess I'm going to go fly heavies internationally. Like, okay, here we go. And it was a weird thing too, because I have such an odd career path that when I was turning down corporate jobs because I didn't want to be away, like I was trying to figure out, like, how do we make relationships work and family work with this job? And I was trying to figure that out. And people were like, you just wasted all your money. Like, really? Like, you're not going to go be an airline pilot? Like, 8 and 6 is too much? Really? What? And I was like, no, actually, I want to go be able to have adventures and travel around and like spend time with my friends. And that was more important to me than the salary and the job progression and the mucho money of going to the airlines. And so none of that was tempting, but the skills, like the learning, the adventure, like, let's go figure this out. Let's go do this thing, is still there. And so that part was always exciting. So I was always excited about learning more, but it was never about progression. It was never about money. And honestly, the examiner piece was like, we lost a couple examiners in Maine, and I was like, well, I have the qualifications. Like, I don't know why they would pick me because I'm so much younger than everybody else out there. But, we went through piles and piles and piles of applications. And when my number came up, I'm like, well, yes, if chosen, I will serve. And I'm okay, here we go. And yeah, so it's just a learning process, right? And even with this, I just did the AOPA FERC, and I love it. It's so well done, and I learned so much out of it. And I'm so glad I did it. And I'm like, wow, I could have renewed because I'm an examiner and gone to one of my examiner buddies, and he could have signed me off, and here we go, because I qualify. But I really loved putting the hours in on that thing and learning the new skills and picking the elective modules to go learn more about, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, no, learning's fun. Learning's fun. I
How
like
did
that
it
about us
prepare
too.
you for the airlines or for your jet type ratings?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing that you said. We learning how to learn, because I've taught for most of my life. So um, I taught, gosh, starting in college, I was teaching. I was a teacher's aide for geology, and then I taught fencing when I was in college. Yeah, right.
Tell me you fence on
And
the boat.
no fencing on the boat. No fencing on the boat. Yeah, no fencing. But I
Ah,
was fully into fencing, and then I lived in Japan and I did kendo for a while and Japanese chess, and I learning stuff. And then when I got back to Europe, because I lived in Europe for a bunch of years, then I was teaching. I was teaching guitar, and I was teaching French to Japanese people, and I was always sort of teaching something, right? And so then when I started flying, I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to have to, start teaching this too. And actually, my newest thing is I'm about to go get my scuba diving instructor certification so that I can teach scuba diving. So it's just like, just keep learning stuff. And I guess the way that it serves is exactly like you said. When you learn how to learn and you learn how your own brain works and how you learn stuff, then your inner monkey is just excited to go climb that mountain because you know how to sort of scramble up that hill. And it's fun to get faced with a big challenge again. Like, never would I have imagined myself flying a 400,000 pound airplane. Never, never, never. Right.
mm.
But when the challenge came up, I'm like, yeah, let's do this. And then of course now you're in, here you are coming up to check ride, and you're like, this is going to be fine. This is going to be okay. I can do this now. So, but of course, the first time you step into that sim, you're like, shiny.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
I one of these days, what I have not learned is I stress myself out during training like you wouldn't believe.
Really?
I see these pilots that go in and oh, it's just another check ride, just another airplane. It'll be fine. And I don't believe that I'm gonna pass until that
Oh no.
that piece of paper is in my hand. So here I
Oh
am,
no.
still years later, kind of the guy cowering in the corner, going, "I think I'm
Oh
gonna
no.
do it."
Oh no. On your
So
fourth type ride. Yeah,
right,
I think that's the thing. So if there's, something we could pass along, that never goes away. Time building never goes away. Like, that next thing never goes away. Like, I have stuff that I need to build time for right now. Like, I need more seaplane hours to examine in seaplanes. So I need to go build seaplane time, and I'm building tailwheel time, and I'd like to build more jet time and turboprop like that. there's always something else you're time building for. It's not like you magically reach 1500 and everything goes away.
Yeah.
You know, you're
Well,
on your fourth type rating and you still don't think you're going to pass till you've got the paper in your hand. Like, and you're incredibly competent. You're super smart. Like, yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I know people say like, oh yeah, eventually it goes away, and I'm waiting for that day that it does. Um, and it's interesting. As far as I still think I like the way you said it because I think time building gets its own sort of negative connotation, and I've said this for years. It's something that is, yes, of course, it's something that we all do. It's something that we all have to do. But time building, you could just as realistically call it experience building or knowledge building or any of these other things that people would go, oh yeah, I did learn a lot of time. I did learn a lot while I was instructing, instead of calling instructors who want to move on to something else time builders. Oh, I learned a lot as a flight instructor. Maybe they're knowledge builders, maybe they're experience builders. As
Yeah.
we get into sort of
Yeah.
semantics in our culture all the time, this is one of those things where it's like there is something to somebody doing this to gain the experience to be better.
Mm-hmm.
Forget what they're doing it for. Forget whether they're going to
Mm-hmm.
go to another,
Mm-hmm.
part of our profession, or if they're going onto a different airplane, but they are still getting something of value. They're bettering themselves while they do it. And that's,
Yeah.
when it comes to instructors who are sort of transitory, and of course, I was one of them. It's one thing to know that you're only going to be in the profession for a short period of time. It's another thing to know that you're going to be there for a short period of time and make as big of a difference as you can positively while you do it.
Or
Because
pull out the experience for yourself so that you learn these pieces that, rather than just sort of blowing through and, starting the plane as quickly as you can to build time.
mm-hmm.
You're going for your fourth type rating and you're already starting to study systems on the Gulf Stream. I have 3 POHs to study in the next 3 weeks, for 3 different airplanes that I'm going to be in. Like I've got all kinds of stuff that I still have to actively study, even though I'm at this quote point of arrival. I'm
Yeah.
still building time to do stuff. I'm still writing plans of action for new rides that I want to be qualified to give. It's always the learning never goes away.
Well, and I feel like we could probably sit here and talk all night. But as we start to kind of wind things down a little bit, one of the best pieces of advice that I was given, and I had the privilege to do, for those that haven't seen it, what I called the 10-question challenge. And I did this for, I think it was about a year and a half. And I was talking to instructors and pilots who, I thought had made it. And it was an honor for me because the last one that I did was Rod Machado. So it all sort of
Oh,
built up
that's
to
fun.
having a conversation with Rod
That's
Machado.
fun.
And forgive me for not remembering exactly which one of these individuals said these words, but he said it was Jim Pittman. Jim Pittman told me this. He goes, the thing that uh, he struggled with initially and has really learned the lesson and tried to pass on is that we are a profession of goalposts. Similar to, using that in the same way of your time building. It's oh, I got to hurry up and get my instrument. Oh, I got to hurry up and get my commercial. Oh, I got to get 1,500 hours. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to do that. And we get so caught up in the notion of I got to go through this goalpost. And before you even have a chance to do your celebratory dance, you're already thinking about where that next goalpost is.
Totally true.
And,
Yeah.
nobody stops to sit there and go, you know what? I just earned my private pilot certificate. Do you know the single digit percentages of human beings on this planet that are capable of flying an airplane? You just did something that a extremely small fraction of people are into, capable of, have done, and we don't look at it that way. We go, oh, cool, I got my private. I'm going to go get my instrument now. Well, hang on a second. You've accomplished this gigantic thing. Make sure you take a moment to take a breath. And we can use that in life. Oh, you just got married. Cool. Take a moment to celebrate that. Oh, I just bought my first house. Take a moment, because as society, we just move so fast that nothing is celebrated to a point where we're satisfied.
Oh, totally.
And that's something
Totally.
that I've really tried to kind of bring into my own life after I heard him say it, because I said, you're absolutely right. We have a celebratory dinner. Like, I would go out to eat or something after my check ride and enjoy myself for like one night before going back into the grind and doing it all over again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
And I'll
it's a
and I'll
lot.
leave you with this story, which is similar to what you said about that goalpost. I for a very brief stint was teaching at this one school, and they asked me to do a discovery flight, and a 16-year-old coming with his mom for his birthday, and I said to her, if you can bring a passport, um, I can sign this off as a lesson, and I'll give him a logbook. And so he arrives there, and he's got his phone, and he's Snapchatting everything. And I took him aside for just a second. We're sitting in the cockpit of this 172, and I said, you're about to fly this thing. You're going to have your hands on those controls. And I get that you want to take pictures and stuff, and I can take some pictures for you, but you're about to fly, and you're going to need those hands and pay attention. And he's like, okay. So here this 16-year-old, like on a weekend, like escaped from high school, birthday present, puts his phone away. We pre-flight, we finish our checklist, we get the airplane started, we get in the air, and it's like you can see the combination of wonder and terror as he leaves the earth. And so now he's got his hands on the controls, and he's flying around, he's doing turns and stuff, and he's so excited. And we come back in, and I help him with the landing. He does a little bit of the landing himself, and we've set the airplane back down, and we've turned it off. And he's like, that's the coolest thing I've ever done. And so as we walk back into the FBO, I say to his mom, if you're up for an extra 20 minutes of ground time, we'll get on IACRA, and I'll have them print out I have them make a student pilot certificate, mail him a plastic student pilot certificate. I'm like, I look at him like, you want that? He's like, I want that. And then I said, so here's the deal. So you're going to go back to school on Monday. Don't tell everybody that you just flew an airplane. Like, let them find out. Like, just be cool. Like, don't walk in and be like, I'm a pilot, right? And so as we're leaving, as he, we finish the ACRA paperwork, and he's leaving with his mom, and he looks up to his mom. He's like, Mom, I'm a pilot. So I think we see that aspiration, that big, golden, beautiful, like, we can do this thing. And that, you're right, that goalpost keeps moving, and we keep chasing it. And we can either be happy where we are here and be excited about, like, oh my gosh, I just landed on water, or oh my gosh, I just landed a heavy in Europe, or, whatever it is. Or we can keep looking at some goalpost out there for, like, when I get to 1500, it's going to be amazing. And, when I get my first type rating, it's going to be amazing. Like, you're on your fourth type rating, and you're still like, I still have so much tension around, it's like, just love the ride. It's love the learning. So yeah, I think that's good advice. Thanks, Jim Pittman.
Yeah, yeah. And just an aside for to finish this off, truly, it's true. The age-old joke of, how do you know there's a pilot in the room?
He'll
They'll
tell you.
Well, Randall, thank you so much. It's always fun to talk to you. It's always fun to have these conversations. You never know where they're going to go, and I've truly enjoyed it. So thank you
Thanks so much. Thanks for all you're doing for NAFI and all you're doing instructing. You're making a big difference nationally, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.